Hello and welcome to another episode of the Interwoven podcast, the voice of the North Essex startup community. I'm Adam Roxby from The Weave. And in today's episode, I'm very excited to share a conversation between James Cracknell and Alison Charles, who is a distinguished resilience and leadership consultant who also chairs IOD in Essex. We'll be diving deep into her fascinating journey from the military to corporate leadership, unpacking her unique resilience framework and discussing crucial topics like navigating change, fostering strong communication in today's evolving workplaces, and her vision for empowering business leaders. So I know you're going to get a lot from this one, so I'm going to just let the conversation go and I'll speak to you afterwards.
Excellent. Okay, so welcome everybody to the Interwoven podcast. I'm absolutely delighted today to be talking with Alison Charles. She's a distinguished resilience and leadership consultant with rich background that integrates everything from the military side right the way through to corporate leadership, personal recovery from her own burnout, and how that has led to the world to cultivate resilience within herself, but in also the people that she works with. And we met at the IOD event in Chelmsford at the beginning of the year, and I was motivated at that particular point to explore a bit more about the IOD. And she is the chair of the IOD Essex, and we got talking, and we were talking about resilience, and I just felt it was very much an area that was certainly kind of mix the two minds, if you like, around that. So I wanted to get her on the podcast. I wanted to talk a bit about resilience. I wanted to talk a bit about a journey and also about the IOD, because I think it's a valuable organization and that really does help business owners develop and figure out what they really want to be doing with their businesses. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Alison. So Alison, welcome. And thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Interwoven podcast.
Thank you, James. It's lovely to be here.
Lovely. So we've touched on a couple of those key areas, but I'd just like to focus a little bit on the journey that got you to where you are today. So can we just do a little bit of a reflection about how it all started, your military service, and maybe where that led into the world of corporates and the work that you were doing within that field?
Absolutely. Joining the army was something that I'd had a passion for since about the age of 14. We had the typical careers days at school, and the army came in, and that was it. I was besotted. That's what I wanted to do, just looking at the opportunities that the military had available. And as soon as I was able, I went down to the career centre and started looking at the different opportunities, and the Army Intelligence Corps caught my eye. And that's what I went into. But it was a very different military to what it is today. So there was still a lot of segregation between men and women. And as women, we still had to go and do all of our training on our own over in Guildford. And then I was very privileged. I was one of the first women to be cap badged into the Intelligence Corps and do the training with the men. And I think up until that point, women going into the military had been, glorified administrators or, kept very separate. So I was right on the cusp of a very emerging, very new and exciting world for the army. And ultimately, Guildford disappeared and everybody does their training together and it's all integrated, and there's so many more opportunities for women now. So I do feel a little bit of a trailblazer being able to do that. And it was a very exciting time.
Yeah, sounds it. And in terms of how that shaped your kind of approach to the corporate world, was there a direct link, or was it very different? Did you feel that you had to do a lot of work to get it into that particular space?
It was very, very different. And I have to admit, like many people leaving the military, I really, really struggled going into big corporate afterwards. I'd come from an environment where people were really passionate about taking care of each other. And yeah, you get people that you didn't necessarily get on with, but because you were all forced into situations where you had to work together very, very closely, and we were very committed as a troop together, you got over it. You found ways of getting on with each other. And then I went into corporate and I found it the exact opposite. I found it very cliquey. People didn't really want to make the effort to overcome differences and find a way of really getting to like each other. And I found that really hard. And the ways of working were very different. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of, you take personal accountability and responsibility in the military, even though there are some, non-negotiables. And then that kind of gets refined in corporate when you move into corporate. And I think you end up in a very different space, and you know who you are, you know what you want out of life, and you're very grounded in yourself.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, I think, find that quite not intimidating, but the kind of, it goes back to, how women and men are meant to behave, and sometimes stronger women, and let's face it, I'm a very direct person anyway, always have been, very A-type personality. It was like, bossy, I was put in the bossy box. But I've equally heard people from all parts of the military, men and women, say that, when they've transitioned into the business world, unless they've actually set up business on their own, they found it a really, really difficult transition. And the biggest difference is that lack of sense of camaraderie and that desire to actually get on with everybody regardless.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think that's, I never had a traditional kind of like military upbringing. I was very fortunate. I did a lot of work in the kind of like combined cadet force stuff and all of that kind of thing. But I do feel that in that corporate world, it was a really challenging place in a lot of respects, that kind of expectations that are put on people in that area. Do you feel then that when you look at what you're doing today in terms of your resilience and the real resilience framework that you've evolved, just talk us a little bit about how maybe some of that kind of journey of transition, change, has actually then molded your perceptions around what it takes to be resilient?
Absolutely. I think one of the earliest experiences, so when I went into the military, I was actually quite shy. And it taught me a lot about mindset, which I think is one of the key cornerstones of resilience, that how you handle that internal dialogue is really important. And that's one of those key cornerstones of that influences then how you feel and how you behave, and then how much pressure or stress can actually influence you, how much you react to it. So I think that's one of the key learnings that I took from the military about the real importance of that self-responsibility, and that idea that we do own how we feel, that professional responsibility and taking ownership in every single direction. So I took that from the military through to corporate with me. And then I've just forgotten the rest of the question, please.
Oh, no, how it molded you into this world of being a resilience coach, somebody that works with people around that, developing leadership skills, all of that kind of molding process. What do you feel that was that kind of like the key drivers in a way to get to there?
Absolutely. So yeah, definitely the mindset was one of those. I think the other key thing, because I left the military and I hadn't planned to, but unfortunately I ended up with medical discharge. I had an accident. And it was that understanding of constant change and how we as human beings can either embrace change and see it as an opportunity and can be curious about what direction it can take us into, or we can kind of try and hold on to the present and try and hold on to things how they are and sort of command and control. And I think what it taught me through, I mean, I've done a variety of different roles, as you mentioned at the beginning. It shaped my ability to cope with change, and that again is a real necessity for leadership. You probably heard the phrase servant leadership.
Yep.
And for me, that embodied servant leadership, that, how can we be curious about how this can open up different opportunities and take us or take the business in a different direction rather than be this really scary thing. And so embracing change is one of the key things about resilience as well, is what I've learned over the years through, I suppose, first of all, being forced into it, but then realizing that there's lots and lots of opportunities. The classic, as one door closes, many, many more opens up. And sometimes in life, it's about having that space. So as one door closes, okay, so perhaps there's nothing in that space, but then you've got space to embrace those opportunities, if that makes sense. And I think that's really important, not just as business leaders, but as business owners. I think sometimes as the business evolves and we evolve, then we get that little bit of space in it and we can get a bit panicked about, where's the next buck coming from type thing. But it's that very space that allows for that creativity and that energy that keeps the business going, allows us to take a step back and think about, well, where we're at, what's the vision, what's the mission, is it still aligned, what are we trying to do, who are we trying to do it for? And just allows the business to grow and develop and reassess in those really important gaps.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that kind of notion of what capacity looks like and making room, space for creativity and growth, and for that kind of constant reflection as to being, like you say, are we aligned to our mission? Is the decisions that we're making the right decisions based on where we really want that impact to manifest and to become evident, and all of that, and creating that that space and having that area is fundamental to building resilience. I think that the interesting area of that is that with the dynamics of the world changing so fast, and we were just talking about kind of financial markets and volatilities and various things like that, and there is an essence that we're all kind of speeding up with that kind of area. So I think it's even more crucial that businesses remain fundamentally focused on building resilience within that. So if you're faced with a leader of a business with a small team, let's say of 10 people or 5, overall, maybe a core at the board level or whatever, but they've got a smallish sized team. How do you work with them to understand, to first create that understanding about the value of resilience? And secondly, what kind of processes might you look at within what they're doing to actually build that capacity for them to become more resilient as a business?
So I have to be honest, typically leaders don't get up in the morning and think about, I need a bit more resilience.
True.
So let's be honest, they're probably not going to come to me looking for resilience. They're going to come looking because the team aren't working well together, or they've got a high staff turnover, or the actual C-suite of the organisation, it's been going really well for a while and they've grown to a certain capacity, but what they've always done once they've hit that ceiling isn't working anymore as they grow to the next level. So it's more about understanding the organisation and seeing where they are at, and seeing and sometimes it's about vision, mission and clarity, and about getting everybody on side so that the C-suite can actually just get a little bit more work-life balance, which ultimately is about resilience. Sometimes it's getting teams so that they communicate and understand each other better, which again comes down to resilience, but that's not what they're looking at. Or the high turnover, the succession planning, sometimes that can be down to well-being, or people are just so stressed out because they're so busy trying to just do the day job. They haven't got the capacity at that particular time to upscale. And you know what it's like with a business when it's growing. It's that real balance between you have to grow the business so everybody's under pressure to deliver a little bit more or a lot more before you can afford to take on new members of staff. And so your existing members of staff can burn out in the meantime. So that's the sort of problems that I'm working with. But the solution absolutely comes back to resilience and how people look at things. But it also comes down to very much succession planning, leadership, well-being, everybody, on the same page, really understanding what the mission and the vision of the organisation is, and transitioning into a more grown-up organisation rather than everybody knowing everybody else and putting all those plans and processes in place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's the other element of that. It's kind of like what you're saying in the beginning is that nobody wakes up with the idea, I need a bit of resilience built into what I'm doing. But I think that there's an element of recognition in leadership that may be changing. The language is changing more. And maybe that's opening up more of that self-awareness in people. I mean, I can't remember a time when the words burnout and various things along that were used as commonly and as importantly within many, many different disciplines, from investors right the way through to HR organizations and the like. So I kind of get this impression that the language is modifying, and therefore the perception around vulnerability within the organization is becoming more attuned to that. And I think it's quite interesting that you choose to use the word resilience in your business and in the way that you are, even though it may not be the button that people push to say, oh, I need resilience. But they're coming to you because they recognize that there are vulnerabilities that come through not being resilient. I think it's part of our collective responsibility to keep that process going as well and keeping those conversations going. So do you think that people are becoming more receptive to that area of self-awareness within leadership? Or do you feel still there's a hardcore of people that feel that leadership is all command and control and, nothing more than that?
I think all of the above, to be honest. I think certain types of businesses, certain sectors are definitely beginning to realise the benefit of things like improving emotional intelligence, having different leadership styles, actually training managers as leaders rather than just promoting people beyond their level of technical competence. That people skills are completely different to whatever subject matter expertise that they might have had that might have got them there isn't going to get them any further. But I think there are still businesses that still, or particular leaders that still want to command and control. And I think there's still some ways to go. Some organisations that I have an opportunity to peer through the window into are at different stages of that, to be fair.
Yeah, I think that's always that kind of recognition that there are, like you say, maybe it's industry specific. Maybe I don't know. It's quite interesting. I don't have very much to do, say, with the construction industry, but one would imagine that the construction industry is one of those industries which hasn't benefited from a more diverse pool of people. It's kept very much, that shape of, if you go to a construction site, the chances are that there will still only be a very low percentage of women in leadership roles. But I think, again, these are things that we've got to kind of put into our language and the way that we sort of kind of evolve our understanding of those industries to change that kind of dynamic. But I genuinely think that there is stuff there that we can kind of, that we work out and work towards. Is your kind of vision of change, if you like, for the world in which you work? Is there a kind of a vision around an organization, how you perceive whether it's good, bad, or non-functional? Is there something that when you go into an organization and you're there looking at the workings, looking at the way that it's delivering, what are you attuned to? What are you looking at within that structure? And actually then saying, well, these are alarm bells and these are, actually, this is a really interesting process. They've got something good here. How can we build on it?
The first things that I'm looking at when I go into an organization is communication. And I'm always particularly interested to hear the senior level talk about how they perceive things and how things are going. And then also get down onto the shop floor and see if there's a match or a mismatch. And I think that's always one of the most telling things about how an organization is really moving forward together. If you've got that really good flow of an open and honest communication where people really can speak their minds and do feel listened to, because it's all very well if communication is happening in theory, but if people only feel that they have the ability to communicate upwards and talk about things that are going well, but also perhaps things that are a bit challenging, but then also that feedback is not valued because nothing happens with it, it's then tied into how information gets channeled, but also the way things are managed, the way things are changed. So it's those two things that I think are the cornerstones of how companies are doing. Have they got really good communication, and how do they manage change? And are people really listened to? Are they co-creating the organization and the culture that they live in, or, as you said earlier, is it command and control?
And in terms of kind of like that culture, the way that things get done within that business, therefore, in terms of changing a communication strategy, what are you looking for from the C-suite in terms of that area? Are there practical things like structure of meetings, using technology, if there is a hybrid working force, or where people are working at home and people are there? Are you coming with a series of kind of tools that people can implement or use when they're actually in that particular framework or that particular style of culture?
I don't use tools per se, because I think every company that I work with is so completely different from another company that I will work with. But what I do is I work with the organizations to find a way forward that's right for them.
Okay. Yeah, no, I get that. I think there, like I say, there are obviously different organizations, different cultures, different areas of working. It's just it's interesting. Do you think that that hybrid model of working at home and working in the office or whatever, that exists at the moment, do you think that that's on a journey to change as well, in terms of people going back to work more, or people looking at that kind of environment of how do we engender conversations, how do we engender things, how do we create change in an organization when somebody's sitting at home and somebody's actually in an environment away from there?
For me, it's not about being in the office or hybrid working or virtual working. I think the important thing is that there is really good, and it comes back to communication again, that there is really good dialogue about what works for the organization and what works for the people that work within that organization. And if it works for everybody to be in the office, or it works to be hybrid, or it works to be virtual, fantastic. It's when people set up an expectation and a way of working that then isn't met in whichever direction from either the management's perspective or the employee's perspective. I have, whatever works for that organization, I think is the right way to go for them. And you get some companies that are all massive creatives, and they really get a lot out of being in a room together and sparking off each other and all of those sorts of things. And I was speaking to a company the other day that are just saying, well, we actually want people back in the office 5 days a week, because the sales team, that's where the deals are made, when the sales team are actually sat together talking about what's going on, talking about who they've met, talking about what's happening in their world. And the person that I was speaking to said, yes, we could actually let the accounts team or the admin team work from home. But that seems a little bit unfair when the majority of the company are the sales team, and they can't, and they're on the road and they're doing things. So we didn't want to sort of create this division. And I thought, well, yeah, I can kind of get that. But then at the same time, the sales team are also saying, well, would it really be a problem if we were just in the office 4 days a week and we had 1 day to just get our heads down? So you can see that you've got this still conflict of expectations on both sides not being met, and then the employees are sort of forced into a corner where they're told this is how they will work. But you can kind of see their argument as well. And I just think even in that scenario, there's got to be a way to work it out that works for everybody, that the business still happens in a way that allows the business to move forwards, but the employees have a little bit of, that all important stuff that we all need when we just need to get our head down and get the admin done and get the figures filled in and the emails answered, and you don't want the distractions. So it's an interesting one. I don't think there's a right answer for that. But what I think needs to happen is more organisations talking to each other at all levels, and just having that flexibility of providing everybody with what they need, and also thinking, and this comes into it as well, thinking about future generations of employees. What is their expectation, and how can we meet that expectation so that we still have vibrant workplaces in the future? Because let's face it, employers that don't, you're not going to attract the cream of the crop.
No, you're right.
And go elsewhere, and therefore you as a business are not going to survive. So, it's pivotal to the whole organisation.
And I think there's definitely that element of recognition that, say, for instance, the future generations are going to come at it from a different angle. I feel very challenged when a lot of the people kind of talk about hybrid work and working from home, because as somebody that work was always conducted in a place and a space which was conditioned around the artifacts of the business, it absorbed the culture, everything, just the share, even turning up and tapping in and signing out, all of these were embedded in the working practices and the way that people perceive that. Now there's none of that. There's no boundaries when you've got people working in that space. And I understand the value of that time to get work done, get your headspace done, having that kind of home environment, sharing the responsibilities at home, which I think is hugely important as well, and giving people that kind of conditioned area. But I do think that for the next generation, they're going to miss out on a lot of how do you embed a culture into an organization when you haven't got the physical artifacts of being in a building. And I think that's quite challenging as well.
To just come back on that point, because I worked in a very large corporate when I was in the sort of office environment way back when. And so I worked with a lot of people all the way around the globe that I never actually ever met in person. Yeah. Or we'd have a big departmental meeting once a year, and people would come from the States and people would come from Asia, and maybe you'd get to meet them once. But we were still incredibly close. You can do that sort of thing virtually. You can build a culture, you can embed a culture, but it's down to the leadership to actually lead and be an example of the culture that they want to see around them. But it's also making time for those relationships to be built. It's making sure that it's not always just about a quick, phone call or a quick Zoom to just check a work question, but actually taking time to get to know the person on the other side of the screen, and getting a virtual coffee and doing some team building. And you can do that virtually. It just takes longer and it takes a lot more effort, and you have to plan it, because you're not getting those casual, water cooler moments and the opportunity for lunch. You have to actually plan it in, but you can get to know people still really well, and you can build that culture very successfully. Large corporates do it all the time. So I think it just requires a different bit of a mindset shift, and certainly, a management of expectations, and also making sure that, on the other side of that, on the flip side of that people aren't being isolated, that people are having also their, the well-being side. Now, granted, it was slightly different because we had people in offices all around the world, and then some people were home workers permanently. But it just took that extra effort to make sure that people were included and felt included.
And I think that kind of concept that you can be emotionally intelligent even if you're not in the same room. You can understand and put yourself into the world of that other person and the vulnerabilities that they may feel, and redirect and reshape the working experience so that people feel more connected and those bonds can be developed. I think is a really valid point and a really interesting one, because I think these are challenges that, funny enough, when you think about businesses which are on a when it's on a trajectory towards growth and wherever, these are challenges which inevitably they don't really kind of grasp until they're right upon them. So I think there's an element of making the people understand that when you're growing from a team of 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever into a team of 15, 20, 30 or whatever, these are challenges which really do manifest themselves. And I think that's probably where your skill set lies as well, is helping people on that growth journey and helping people understand that area. So, I think that's the real value of your kind of work in a lot of respects, particularly for those organizations that are faced with, new funding requirements, investors, people like that are now putting on conditions for growth and saying, look, you've got to get to, X number of headcount to get to this kind of scale or whatever. And that's incredibly scary for many founders and many people. So I think having somebody like you embedded in that kind of role and helping them see what that kind of those stresses and strains within the leadership system would be incredibly valuable for them.
Absolutely. And it's about having the mindset and the leadership skills to lead with that in mind, in terms of bringing in a few things that perhaps they haven't thought about. So companies don't always tend to think about, what are the values of the organization, but then doing that really important dialogue where you actually, well, what's the value of this team? How do the individual values fit into the team values? How do we operate together? Let's discuss and co-create some ground rules. How do you bring in somebody new? If they've worked somewhere else, then it's just about a case of helping them understand, okay, well, that was the previous environment, this is the new environment. If you've got somebody coming out of school or university, it's even scarier for them. And so how do you onboard people even more into what you expect for them in terms of the work environment when they've only ever been in an environment where it's all about education?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you do need to have those physical touch points, that physical onboarding, actually seeing, chatting to people, that osmotic communication, learning about people, learning how the organization works. So, yeah, I still think there is a place for the, being in the office bit, because I think especially people coming in from education into the workplace will miss out on so much if you miss that step. But then that's not to say you can't do a bit of that and then people work from home or have hybrid working. I've heard a lot of people saying that basic communication has been a real challenge with people coming in from school, because there's so much of a reliance on social media and computer games and AI and everything. Actually, just teaching people basic communication, like how to write emails and how to speak to people.
Yeah. And I think that kind of reliance on social media, that reliance on everything like that is really important, because what you're asking the next generation to actually commit to when it comes into the workforce and thinking about what they really want to be doing within the workforce. And we see this at the university a lot, where people are challenging. They really are challenged by that communication or lack of communication, and everything is short term. And I think that there's another element where what we're seeing now going forward is a vulnerability, because we're already potentially, we're living in choppy times. It's really uncertain. It's massive. If you're sitting in an organization that's very vulnerable to what's happening in the real world at the moment, you're crying out for people to lean in to that level of communication, just to give you that sense of confidence that you're going to be required, that there is something beyond this. And I think there's so many different challenges in that particular space. But yeah, really interesting stuff. I just want to before we kind of wrap up, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Institute of Directors, because I like I said, I came along at the beginning of the year to the event in Chelmsford, met you and met some of the people that were in the Essex area. But I was really, when we met up at the mastermind that you put together last week, I was really impressed by what you were saying about your vision for IOD within the region, around the community side, the value of bringing people together and all of that. So first and foremost, what attracted you to the IOD? And secondly, why did you want to become the chair of the region?
What attracted me initially for the Institute of Directors, for me, I mean, obviously networking is a big part of it, but it does go beyond networking, although the connections have been invaluable. But it's about being a part of a trusted community with an organisation that really is committed to raising standards in business. So making sure when I started my limited company that I knew what was expected of me in all areas of running a limited company business. And the IOD is, world class at that. They've got professional development, they've got policy influence at the highest level, they've got practical resources to support governance, strategy, growth, you name it. You can get access to that in the IOD, and if you want to, you can go all the way up to the chartered director if you feel thus inclined. So initially it was about doing all of that. And then I moved out of London in 2021 during lockdown and moved out to Essex. And so natural progression to start doing the Essex events. And the then chair, Paul Durrant, was trying to, bring in-person events back online as we moved out of lockdown. And I was really keen I'd spent, all that time training people and consulting online, and I was desperate to actually get into a room of people. In fact, I think the first training that I delivered in front of an audience, I did a little happy dance. I think they thought I'd completely lost it. And Paul had an opportunity of becoming an ambassador, which I thought, well, that would be brilliant to be more involved and more immersed. I've just moved to the area. And we worked really well together. And so when his vice chair stood down, he asked if I was interested, and just the thought of being able to be more immersed in the community and just build a really thriving community and helping to build on his fantastic work. For a community that just felt supported, inspired and empowered, just really appealed. So when, obviously as vice chair, when he stood down because he retired at the end of February, I stood up into the chair role, and here we are.
Excellent.
So working really hard to get a really interesting year ahead for all the local members, and hopefully building on our membership with people that really, really want to be involved and grow and learn together with us.
And I think there's always a challenge when you're building communities, is that first and foremost, there's a good bit that people are paying, they're investing stuff into what they're doing with the IOD. So there's a level of commitment that people feel, that they're tied to. The second part of that is relying on them to understand that it's as much their community as it is everybody else's. In other words, the more they put in, the more they're going to get out of it. And I think there's an element of passivity that people sit on the side of communities and they go, oh, hello, I'm here, or whatever, and they never get involved. So I think there's an element of that, isn't there, to actually get people to recognize that the more you do put into these things, the more you will get out of it. But I'm really looking forward to seeing how it all progresses and develops from that point. And and it's a really welcoming environment, and I'd recommend it 100%. So I think it's really good. Just a couple of sort of quick questions, just a more quick fire as we're pushing on for time now. First part of it is, what's your favorite meal on your birthday?
Favorite meal on my birthday? Oh, that's a tough one, because I'm somebody that loves the variety of food. I love to cook. So to narrow it down to one thing is really hard. Yeah. I would probably gravitate more towards something like Mexican or Spanish, something like that. But then I'm also equally happy with a nice plate of liver and bacon in our local pub. So
the last book you read, either business or novel or?
The last book I read was all about intermittent fasting by Jen Stevens, called Delay, Don't Deny.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Alison. Thank you for joining us on the Interwoven podcast. It's a great conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. If people can reach you, what's the best way of getting in contact with you?
Email is
Email?
always a good way. alison@realresilience.co.uk.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to seeing you again at the IID events.
Thank you, James. Take care.
And you.
Wow, wasn't that amazing? So glad to have people like Alison here in the community and doing the work that she's doing. Just a quick reminder, if you want to stay involved and stay in touch, then you can head over to our website, wearetheweave.co.uk. And don't forget to let us know your comments or questions by sending us a quick message. I've been Adam Roxby, Director of Communications, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.